Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Telecommunications Access Minnesota, and MSCC Tax Service. MSCC Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and online at MSCCtax.com.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents, where tonight we're going to be talking about the Minnesota Vikings and the Metrodome. If you've been following the news, you know that the Vikings have announced that they're not going to renew their lease in the Metrodome. So tonight we're going to talk about what that might mean. And we're going to start our program this evening with a little piece by Annie Cook on the Minnesota Vikings.
The Metrodome, the home of the Vikings for the past 28 seasons. Though old, it still is one of the most daunting places to play.
Very, very loud, but a lot of fan base there, and I think that's what gives them the advantage over some of the other teams that aren't used to having an indoor arena.
But the Vikings are looking for a new home because their Metrodome lease is up in 2011. This is good news for fans like Jody Niles who don't relish in the Metrodome experience.
You didn't really know what was going on. When you watch it somewhere else, like at home even, it's so much more exciting because you know exactly what's going on. Owner
Ziggy Wilf says the team will not renew its lease with the Dome. Instead, he's proposed an $800 million facility in downtown Minneapolis. To build it, though, the team would need tax dollars, and in times of unallotments and budget cuts for lawmakers and fans, a near $1 billion investment may not be timely.
With gas prices, food prices, ticket prices, going down to a game is getting pretty expensive. So people would rather stay at home or go to their local bar to enjoy the Vikings fun.
I mean, we bought nachos, it was $4.
With high-definition, big-screen television, surround sound, and stadium food at the bar, watching a game in person has lost some flair.
Two big 102-inch screens down here, so it's like you're at the game. And we scream loud enough, it sounds like we're in the Dome.
And even in greater Minnesota, fans would be sad to see their Vikings go, but it's an idea that isn't so far-fetched.
Definitely a Vikings fans up here. I'm one of the few Packer fans up here, but yes, this is definitely Viking territory.
See, if the Vikings don't get support for their new stadium, there's a brand new stadium being built in Los Angeles that doesn't have a team to call it home. For Lakeland News at 10, I'm Annie Cook.
My guest this evening is Roy Terwilliger, who is the chair of the Metropolitan Sports Facility Commission. He was appointed by Governor Pawlenty in 2003 for this position, and he was reappointed again in 2007. And the commission consists of 7 members who serve 4-year terms. This commission owns and operates the Metrodome and is funded through admission taxes, rent, concessions, and other revenues, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Roy has over 40 years of experience in various areas of the private and public sector, including nonprofit organization management, as well as startup and strategic planning and direction of various enterprises. He served as a Minnesota senator from 1992 to 2003, representing the people of Edina and Eden Prairie. He has an undergraduate degree from the University of South Dakota and a master's degree from the University of Iowa. He's been in the banking industry since 1965 and is currently the president of the flagship financial group of Eden Prairie, Minnesota, with banking operations in a number of other communities. Welcome to the show, Roy.
Thanks for having me.
And you got a challenge following Annie's little piece here of getting into this topic. But before we get into the topic of the Vikings and Metrodome, there's a couple of things that I've highlighted that I think that our viewers might kind of find interesting. One is that the Metrodome costs $68 million to build. That's about $2 million under the budget that was established for, which is pretty rare in this day and age. It opened in 1982, and it would replace the old Metropolitan Stadium in Bloomington, and many of us have been to that place. The stadium is currently 27 years old, making it the 9th oldest stadium in the National Football League. And a couple other little tidbits here. The Metrodome is the only venue to host a Major League All-Star game, a Super Bowl, an NCAA Final Four, and a World Series. It has been recognized as one of the loudest dome venues to view a game, due in part to the fact that the sound is recycled through the stadium because of the domed roof. In fact, in the 1987 and 91 World Series, the peak decibel levels were measured at 125 and 118 respectively, which makes it comparable to a jet airliner, both close to the threshold of pain. And finally, there's a lot of career achievement events that occurred in the Metrodome, but the most recent one was on October 5th this year, with a 30-23 victory over the Green Bay Packers, when Brett Favre of the Vikings became the first quarterback in NFL history to defeat every one of the league's 32 franchises. So that's pretty amazing stuff.
It's quite a place.
And you seem like a very reasonable person. How did you ever get into a job like this?
Well, thanks, Ray. I was in the Senate, as you mentioned, from 1992 to 2003. And during that time, I got involved into the stadium issues. At that time, you might recall, the mid-90s, the Twins, of course, were the first ones to come out and talk about the need for a new ballpark. And then, of course, the Vikings came along after that, as well as the Gophers. And I was interested in the issue and love sports and want to see us have good sports teams. And most importantly, I want to see us have the facility that's available to have all kinds of sports, high school sports, whatever. So I was the author of several bills, and I was on several task forces that were appointed by a couple different governors. And so when I retired from the Senate, really hadn't applied for this job, but the governor, who's a good friend, called afterwards and asked me if I would do this. So I was very happy to accept it and went through a real learning curve. I thought as close as I was to what had taken place in as many games and events as I'd been to down at the Metrodome, I really didn't know as much about it as I thought I did. For example, you drive by the place every day and you see it and you think, well, there's my tax dollars at work, and it's only for the Vikings and the Twins and the Gophers. However, once you get nearer to it, you find out that basically there are very few tax dollars were involved. And there's not one state tax dollar at all in the Metrodome. The state provided the ability for the city of Minneapolis to issue the bonds, or for the Metropolitan Council to issue the bonds, and those bonds were initially serviced while the stadium was being built by a hospitality tax and liquor and food in the stadium district in the city of Minneapolis. Over the years, $235 million have come back into the state coffers, but there's not one state tax dollar in the Metrodome. $235 million, however, have come into the revenues of the state through various sales and income taxes. A little known fact, when professional athletes and professional teams come in here, the athletes from the other teams also pay taxes in Minnesota. The Vikings themselves, their staff pay $18 million a year just in income taxes into the state. But there's no state tax dollars that went into the facility. The tax dollars that went into it, as I say, were hospitality taxes, and some dollars, tax dollars that went in by the city of Minneapolis, $11 million, that went in to build infrastructure, roads, relocate roads, et cetera. So, you know, when you look at that, you say, well, wow, that's something I didn't know. Then you start realizing that it's a self-sufficient operation. It has an operating budget of about $15 million a year. There's no debt. We've long ago paid off the debt on the revenue bonds that were sold for the Metrodome. And we have about a $15 million surplus. So it's been a public-private partnership in the purest sense of the word. It does not receive tax subsidies. Of course, it doesn't pay property taxes, so it has that advantage, I guess. But and then when you start thinking about what goes on there, we tend to think of it like we're talking here about it being a Viking stadium. And the Twins have played there for 28 years, and they finally are going to a new ballpark. And the Gophers played there for 27 years. But there are 300 event days a year that take place, far more than those games that I've just talked about. And people don't realize that. Even if you take the Twins and the Gophers out of there, there's still 215 approximately event days a year that place is used for various types of events, such as we've had the Final Four there 2 times. We've had several regional Final Fours, first-round Final Fours. The Prep Bowl has been there for many years. It's a wonderful event. High school kids come in and play there. The state hockey or state soccer playoffs are all held there. Everything from Monster Jam, monster trucks coming in there, to the Hmong New Year, to Billy Graham Crusades. The place is used around the clock. And the reason this becomes so significant when you start looking at the Metrodome is that you need this type of a facility to have an NFL franchise. Only 32 teams in the country, 32 cities have a team throughout the country. So you need to have this type of a facility, one that's competitive for the NFL team, to have them. But having them allows you to be able to have these other events at a relatively inexpensive cost. The State High School League couldn't pay the right amount of money to be able to host that event like they do every year, but having the Vikings there, you know, provides enough additional cash inflow that allows us to have these events for a very nominal price. So it's been a great bargain. And I think people need to realize that we're in the process, the public body that I had, the Sports Facilities Commission, our job is to do two things. It's to promote and to maintain professional football and professional baseball in Minnesota. This is charged by statute. And the other part of it is to oversee this particular facility. But it's reached beyond that. When they originally dreamed of doing this, I don't think they, in their wildest imagination, thought that it would be as successful as it's been. It doesn't get that type of credit, and it's not just a Viking stadium. It's a facility for all kids and grown-ups and people that want different things year-round in the state.
I was amazed at how emotional the Twins players got when they left, because you always hear about how excited everybody is to get to their new stadium. But there were a lot of pitchers and infielders running out and grabbing dirt, and they had really fond memories because there were some pretty magical things that happened in the Metrodome. Now, you've lost the Twins, and if you lose the Vikings, what would that mean to the Metrodome?
Well, losing the Twins, and along with the Gophers, only cost us about $1.8 million out of our budget. Losing the Vikings would cost us $7 to $8 million out of our budget. When you start losing that type of money, it would mean one of two things. We would have to, well, first, we'd have to probably get some tax subsidy to come in to assist it, just to keep it open. But secondly, what would probably occur, it would probably eventually fall into disrepair, because right now, when we have these ongoing programs going, it's constantly being maintained and looked after and kept up to date. Without that kind of income, you wouldn't be able to probably do that. So the facility would end up like the one in Pontiac, Michigan, where the Lions used to play. It'll eventually be imploded. So it's important to keep the Vikings here if we're going to have that type of a facility. And if we're going to keep the Vikings here, we have to have a facility that works for them as they compete with other teams in the NFL.
I know that there was a lot of discussion a few years ago about moving them to a suburb. I think that was when Red McCombs was the owner. That sort of faded away. And I know that probably a lot of people think that the Vikings are making a lot of money, but if you look at the statistics of how they rank in the NFL, I think they're 31st or 32nd in revenue, which is what's driving their decision to say we can't keep operating this way. Is that a fair statement?
That's right. And out of the 32 teams, they claim Vikings statistics show 32 out of the 32 teams. And when you look at who they compete with, the Packers are in a newly remodeled stadium, the Bears are in a newly remodeled stadium, and the Lions are in a brand new stadium. And those stadiums produce better revenue flows for the team than the Metrodome does. So what's going to eventually occur is that the Vikings become increasingly non-competitive on the field because they'll have fewer dollars to work with. A case in point right now, there's no revenue sharing. There's revenue sharing in the NFL. There's no revenue sharing in baseball. And so you look at the major market teams have much larger payrolls, and what's happening right now, the Yankees, $200+ million payroll, the Twins have a $70 million payroll. That type of disparity tends to get into the stream, and the NFL has been doing it right. They're trying to keep everybody so that there can be parity, and so that small markets and big markets can compete against each other.
I know that the Wilfs have certainly not made any claims that they're looking to move this team. I think since they've been the owner, since their ownership groups have been involved, they've really made an effort to say that we want to stay in Minnesota. But as Annie alluded to in her piece, there is a new stadium being built in California without a team. And so I suspect sometime along the line, somebody's going to make the implication that if we don't do something, they will be gone. But the fact is, I think they only have about 17 games left under this lease to play in the Metrodome. And we sort of passed up some opportunities maybe in the last 4 or 5 years to do something about this. Really tough economic times now. What's on the table from your Facilities Commission to do? Are you looking at remodeling, or what would you like to do?
Well, we've had extensive study. We've spent a lot of time trying to fulfill our statutory obligation as the public of retaining the NFL franchise here. And we have looked at the numbers of what it would cost just to remodel the current facility. And those numbers are about $600 million just to remodel this current facility, which, keep in mind, only cost $55 million back when it was initially built. The fact is that doesn't still bring it up to the level of the other NFL franchises. It's probably a short-term fix of about 10 to 15 years. By what we're talking about right now is by going into it and reconstructing the Metrodome. We would go in and save what we could, reuse what we could, move the facility a little bit east, knock down what is there for the most part, grind it back up, reuse whatever we can reuse the, of course, the heating and cooling plant and all the facilities, the transportation facilities, et cetera. And that would cost more. But it's a long-term solution, and it would put us in a competitive mode with the other facilities. The current facility is about 800,000 square feet. New NFL venues that house an NFL team are about twice that. The new one in the Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, which just is open now for the first year, that facility is about 1.6 million square feet, so about double what we have. But it's, you know, it's one of those things that, is there ever a right time to build and rebuild and do infrastructure? You know, I don't know that you can really answer that. And you could make a case right now when times are difficult, and I realize they are, and the legislative policymakers are looking at that. And of course, without a thorough understanding of what all goes on in the Metrodome, it's easy to say, well, not now. But it's costly to delay. You know, a case in point, the Twins in the 1997 bill, which I happen to be the author of in the Senate, which did not pass in the House, and we didn't do anything, that was going to be a $280 million facility with a retractable roof located along the river, Mississippi River, in downtown Minneapolis. We didn't do it. Fast forward to today, 10 years later, we're getting ready to move into the new Target field. It's going to be a beautiful ballpark, but an outdoor ballpark, no roof on it, in a smaller site for $545 million. So delay becomes a delay of infrastructure, like delay of maintenance on a building or delay of maintenance on a road system or replacing something becomes expensive. Plus, right now, jobs are needed, and there would be a lot of jobs that would come out of this. Probably 10,000 jobs would come out of redoing the Metrodome. So right now, I think it's a time for us as a commission to talk to the public, to be out there saying, look, let's not get overly excited about newspaper headlines. Let's think this through, and that's what we're trying to do. We've been working on plans. We've been working on costing. We're hopeful that as we proceed into this next legislative session, that the key policymakers will say, let's talk about this. There must be some way we can do this. Nobody wants to lose the Vikings. And losing the Vikings would be tantamount to our losing the facility that houses them, which houses all these other dreams of kids throughout this state that come in there to be cheerleaders or play in the high school band or play baseball or whatever it might be. So it's really something we have to think about very carefully and not overreact too quickly to the current times. We have to kind of think this through for the long term.
I know you're not a spokesperson for the Vikings, but you are a proponent for keeping them here. And the thing that I think we hear often is that, you know, they're billionaire owners, and the schools can't get the money that they need to operate around in the whole greater Minnesota area, in the metropolitan area too. But I think you would have made the point a number of times that this isn't competing for those same tax dollars, is it?
That's right. You know, and I don't think anybody, by anything I say here tonight or anything I think the Vikings have ever said, there's no downplaying of the current economic needs that are out there for whether it be schools or healthcare or you know, nursing homes or whatever it might be. Those needs are very real. and they're growing and increasing every day, and everybody's aware of those and concerned about them. But it would not compete in that same area. What we're talking about here is using, and there's no specific plan put in place yet, but if you take a model from before, you try to take hospitality taxes or such from people who either go there, play there, or benefit from the team being there, so you get that kind of financing involved, along with the type of financing where you really are utilizing the credit facilities of the state or the city or the metropolitan area in some fashion to float bonds, and then you retire those bonds with these various user fees and other things that come in, plus a significant contribution from the NFL and from the Vikings themselves.
Where do the Vikings as an organization stand in terms of that remodel concept?
Well, the remodel, as I mentioned, a true remodel, which is just changing the widths of the hallways and adding some bathrooms and such, doesn't do some of the basic things you need to have done there to increase the revenue stream, such as, you probably need to add another tier up above. It's a 2-tier stadium now. The newer stadiums are like 4 stadium tiers, and they have a club seating area, and they'll have a suite area, and then they'll have a general area, that type of a thing. By doing that, they're able to frankly charge more money to a corporation that's coming in and renting a suite for year-round use for different events. Those suites have a little more exclusivity in the venues, like at the Twins' new Target Field, or at the XL Center, or even at the Target Center where the Timberwolves play. Those suites have a little more exclusivity, hence they can get a little more money for them. They have bathrooms that are available to the suites, et cetera, like that. That's for the people who want to avail themselves of that and are willing to pay for it. The current facility is not constructed that way. You'd almost have to redo the whole thing, and that's what we found with the extreme cost of a makeover, and it's only for short term. We really need to we call it reconstruct, that is, use what we can and then reconstruct in that same area to make it really work in the long term.
So if you were to do that reconstruction, are the Vikings open to that? Are
yes,
they in favor
yes,
of doing
they are. They've been involved all along the way. We've had an architectural firm, in fact, the same one that did the design for the new Dallas Texans stadium, HKS out of Dallas. We've utilized them and their services all this last year, and we use Mortensen Construction out of Minneapolis to help with the costing of it as they've done the design work. That design has not been released to this date, but it will be in the near future, and that is the reconstructed Metrodome. And the Vikings have been involved and they've had a consultant in there that, as we talk about this new facility, this reconstructed Metrodome Next is the official name of the title of it, as we talk about, well, how do we keep amateur baseball for high school kids and college kids to be able to play in there during the middle of the winter? And so they've come in, and the NFL consultants and the other people have worked together so that it all fits together. You know, just mentioning amateur baseball, which is a big thing in Minnesota, outstate, greater Minnesota, baseball, amateur baseball is big time. Every town likes to go have a baseball team. And in the Metrodome, little known fact of those event days, we will have, in those 30 event days like of March, year before last, we had 140 baseball games. They were playing around the clock. College kids and high school kids were coming in playing at 1 and 2 in the morning, starting their games then. I mean, obviously the college kids were the ones playing in the middle of the night, and high school kids the other time, but 140 games during a 30-month period of time, 30-day period of the month, and it was 180 games, but we only had 30 event days there. So the facility is just very utilized, and we want to keep it that way.
And as you mentioned, if you lost the Vikings as a tenant, you wouldn't be able to afford to do that the way it is today.
The cash flow would be so
Right.
severely hampered, we wouldn't be able to do that.
What is your sense, having been in the Senate yourself, what is your sense of the attitude going into the session this year? Do you think there's an urgency to get this on the table, at least to talk about it?
Well, there are people that say there must be something we can do to get this ball rolling. And maybe it's just studying it this year and getting the bill passed next year, but something to exhibit to the NFL and to the Vikings that we're serious about retaining them here. I think there are a significant number of people that are that way. They're right now waiting to see how the numbers are, and they're all looking ahead. Next year's an election year, and they're saying, gee, how does this impact me? But you know, there are people out there on both sides of this issue, and we need to be thoughtful about it. And I think once people start getting educated on it and think it through, I think it will lend courage to those people to say, we absolutely need to move ahead.
We're down just to a minute or so here, but if you were to get the approval to go ahead and do that reconstruction, what would you do with the Vikings in the interim?
Well,
thoughts about that?
Good fortune, we now have the Gopher Stadium. Now it's smaller, 50,000 to the 64,000 that are in the Metrodome. So they'd add some temporary seats, but it would still be smaller. We'd still have some fewer seats. But the university's amenable to this, to allowing the Vikings to come in and play there for 2 years. It's a 32-month construction process. We would time it so that they would play 2 seasons over in the Gopher Stadium, and then they'd be back home in a Metrodome next.
Do you have a website that people can go to keep up to date on this? You probably don't remember it off the top of your head.
I don't. Well, you can go to MSFC.com,
okay.
Which is the Metropolitan Sports Facilities Commission's website, MSFC.com. There are several studies on taxes, jobs, designs, all that. That's all available to the public. Well,
it's a daunting task. But time is running out, and we're going to have to do something one way or another, aren't we?
Well, it's daunting, but you know, I think one of the things that's good about Minnesota is I think once people kind of understand the issue and thoroughly go through it, I think they will make the right decision, which is ultimately to proceed, keep the Vikings here, so that we can have all these other things for our quality of life.
Well, good luck in your job.
Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot,
for
Ray.
taking the time to be on the program.
Appreciate it very much.
Appreciate it. You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time. Actually, it was